caterers were still arranging the centerpieces when I arrived at the Harbourview Club, and I remember thinking the white roses looked almost too perfect. The kind of perfect that exists only in photographs and other people's lives. I smoothed the front of my blazer and told myself to breathe. This was my night. My engagement party. The one my mother had insisted on throwing. The one she'd spent 4 months planning in a group chat I was never added to. I should have read that a sign. The venue was beautiful, I'll give her that. Cream tablecloths, candles in mercury glass holders, a string quartet setting up near the window that overlooked the harbour. 60-something people my parents had invited, their neighbours, their country club friends, my father's colleagues from the law firm. A handful of relatives I hadn't seen since my cousin's quinceañera when I was 19. My fiancé's family had flown in from Portland. His mother, warm and practical and nothing like mine, had texted me that morning, so excited. Can't wait to celebrate you both. I'd saved that text. I read it twice in the parking lot before I went inside. My fiancé met me at the door. He looked relieved to see me, which should have told me something too. They moved the seating, he said quietly, his hand finding the small of my back. Moved it how? He hesitated. Your parents are at the centre table with the Hendersons and the Walshes. My parents are at the centre table with the Hendersons and the Walshes. My parents are at table 4. We're at. He stopped. Where? Table 9. I knew the room's layout by heart because I'd asked my mother to send it to me 3 times before she finally did, 2 weeks late and without labels. Table 9 was near the service entrance. I know because I'd studied that layout, had memorised where every table fell, had circled in my mind where I assumed we would sit at the centre, or close to it. It was our engagement party. We were the reason every person in that room had driven here tonight. Table 9 was next to the door that the servers used to bring food out from the kitchen. Every time it opened, you'd get a draft and the smell of whatever was on the menu. I stood there for a moment, just taking that in. My fiancé squeezed my hand. We don't have to stay long, he said. We're not leaving early from our own engagement party, I told him. I said it more firmly than I felt it, but I meant it in a different way than he understood. I wasn't staying because I was obligated. I was staying because I'd spent 31 years letting my family shrink me in quiet rooms, and I was done doing it quietly. I found my mother near the bar, holding a glass of white wine and laughing at something my father's partner had said. She looked stunning. Emerald dress, hair done up, the kind of composed that requires a full morning of preparation. She saw me and her smile didn't change, which is its own kind of message. You look tired, she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. I'm fine, I said. Can we talk about the seating? There's nothing to talk about, sweetheart. Everything's arranged. We're at table 9. The room fills in so nicely from that side, she said, as though she was describing a landscape painting. I looked at her. She looked back at me with the same pleasant, impenetrable expression she'd been perfecting since I was in middle school. The one that meant the conversation was already over and I was the only one who hadn't been told. My sister found me 20 minutes later, when I was standing near the window pretending to be interested in the harbour. She's 3 years younger than me, has my mother's eyes and my father's talent for making everything about herself, and she had been, for most of our lives, the axis around which the family rotated. She got the car for her 16th birthday. I got a card. She got 4 years of college paid for in full. I had loans I was still paying off. She got the childhood bedroom preserved like a shrine when she moved out. I got mine converted into a home office the same week I left for college. None of this made me hate her. I want to be clear about that. It made me tired in a way that lives behind your sternum, but it didn't make me hate her. Mom outdid herself, my sister said, looking around with the satisfied expression of someone who had been involved in planning this and wanted credit for it. It's beautiful, I agreed. You should see the cake. She had it custom made, ivory fondant with sugar flowers. She paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, Oh, she used a photo of you two from the beach last summer, the one I took, the one I had specifically told my mother I didn't want used for anything because my fiancé had sunburned ears and I had a visible strap mark on my shoulder. My mother had said, of course, Of course, and then used it anyway. Of course she did, I said. My sister gave me a sideways look. You could just say thank you. I let that go. The party moved along the way these things do. Cocktail hour sliding into dinner. Conversations overlapping. The string quartet shifting into something more ambient. I made the rounds. I shook hands and accepted hugs and answered questions about wedding dates and where we were registered and what I did for work. I smiled until my face ached. My fiancé stayed close, a steady, warm presence, occasionally catching my eye across a table with a look that said, "We'll decompress later. We'll be fine. I see you." Dinner was served. We sat at table 9, which was, as promised, directly beside the service entrance. Every few minutes the door would swing open and a server would come through with a tray, and a wave of warm kitchen air and roasted garlic would roll over us. My fiancé's mother, to her enormous credit, never mentioned it. She talked to us about Portland and her garden and a documentary she'd been watching about deep-sea fish. She was kind to me in the way that people are kind when they understand, without being told that someone needs kindness. I was grateful for her in a way I didn't have words for. The toast started around 7:30. My father stood up at the centre table, the room settling into attentive quiet the way it always did for him, because he was the kind of man rooms quieted for, and said something elegant and brief about love and partnership, and welcoming my fiancé into the family. He didn't say my name once. I counted. Then my mother stood up and she spoke for 4 minutes about the wedding planning process, the venue research she'd already begun on my behalf, the florist she'd already told, the colour palette she'd already decided on. She used the word "we" 14 times. At no point in 4 minutes did she describe anything about me. Not who I was, not what I'd accomplished, not what she loved about me, or hoped for me, or saw in me. She did say that my fiancé was exactly the kind of person this family needed. I sat at table 9 and thought, I see you. Then my sister stood up. I hadn't expected her to. Nobody had told me she was going to speak. She raised her glass and smiled the way she does when there are a lot of people watching. And she said, "To my big sister, who has always needed a little extra guidance finding her way." She laughed lightly. A few people laughed along, but she found someone wonderful, and that's what matters. Who's always needed a little extra guidance finding her way? I held my wine glass and did not react, because I have 31 years of practice not reacting. But I heard it, and I felt it, and I filed it. My fiancé's hand found mine under the table. After dinner, there was a loose, social hour. Music, dessert, people milling around. I excused myself to use the restroom and took the long way back, passing the bar, passing the photo display my mother had arranged near the entrance. 20 framed photos on a draped table. I'd been sent exactly none of them for approval. I looked at them one by one. My parents' wedding, my sister as a baby, my sister's high school graduation, my sister's college graduation, my sister and her last boyfriend at Thanksgiving, my fiancé and me, that beach photo, and then, at the end of the row, a photo I had never seen before. It was my fiancé and my sister, standing together at what looks like my parents' backyard. I didn't recognize the occasion. They were both smiling at the camera, and my sister had her hand on his arm in the easy way that people touch people they're comfortable with. I looked at it for a moment. I picked it up and flipped it over. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, June backyard cookout. I didn't know there had been a backyard cookout in June. I hadn't been invited. I set the photo back down carefully, exactly where I'd found it. I went back out into the party and found my fiancé at the dessert table and said, quietly, close to his ear, "There's a photo of you and my sister at a June cookout at my parents' house. You didn't tell me you'd been there." He turned to look at me. You'd been there. He turned to look at me. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, exactly, but its first cousin. "Your mum invited me. She said you were going to be there. I assumed you knew. I wasn't invited." He was quiet. "Were there other times?" I asked. He was quiet for slightly longer than he should have been. I stepped back from him, just one step, but the physical space felt necessary. "We'll talk about this later," I said. I kept my voice even. "I am my father's daughter in at least one way. I learned early how to keep my voice even when the room is watching. Right now I need a few minutes. I took my purse from the back of my chair at table 9 and walked to the hallway off the main entrance, the one that led to the coat room and a small lounge nobody was using. I sat down on a bench and I breathed. I thought about the seating chart, the photo display, the toast, the cookout in June that I hadn't been told about. Pattern recognition is its own kind of grief. I opened my phone. I had a text from my best friend, Simone, who hadn't been invited tonight because my mother had said the venue had a strict guest count, which I later confirmed was not true. The venue capacity was 140 and we had 63 people there. Simone had texted, "Thinking of you tonight. How's it going?" I texted back, "Call me tomorrow, there's a lot." I sat there for another minute. Then I took a breath and made a decision. I went back into the party. I found my mother's friend Denise, who has known me since I was 7, who used to drive me to piano lessons when my mother couldn't be bothered, who has always been, quietly, in my corner. I asked her if I could borrow her phone to check something, claiming mine was dying. She handed it over without question. I opened the camera and turned the video setting on. I tucked the phone into the outer pocket of my blazer, lens facing out through the small mesh opening, and went back to the photo display. Standing there, I said clearly enough to carry, not shouting, just speaking at the volume of someone making a point at a party. "Mom, can you come here for a second? I want to ask you about this photo display." My mother crossed the room. My sister drifted over. My father followed, because he always follows when there's a potential problem to manage. I pointed to the June photo. "Can you explain this one to me?" My mother's expression flickered. "Just once, just briefly. It's from the summer. You know how we do those cookouts. I wasn't invited to this one." "You were busy," she said. "I wasn't busy. Nobody contacted me. You're always so busy with work. I wasn't busy in June. I was in the city. I would have come." I paused. Were there other events I wasn't told about? My sister said with a small, tight smile, "You're making a scene." "I'm asking a question at my engagement party," I said. "That's not a scene." My father said very quietly and very precisely, "This isn't the place." "You seated me by the kitchen door," I said. Same quiet tone. "You made toast that didn't mention my name. You had my fiancé over in June and didn't invite me, and my sister said in front of 60 people I needed guidance finding my way." I looked at each of them. "I think this is exactly the place." My mother's voice dropped to something I recognized, the register she reserved for when she wanted to wound without witnesses. She leaned in slightly and said, "You have always had to make everything harder than it needs to be. Do you know how much this party cost? Do you know what we've done for you? You stand there acting like a victim when you have been a burden on this family your entire life. A burden." She said it the way you say a word you've been thinking for a long time. I heard Denise, standing a few feet away, draw a sharp breath. I reached into my blazer pocket and stopped the recording. I looked at my mother for a long moment. "Thank you," I said. "That's actually very helpful." She didn't understand what I meant. I could see she thought she'd won something. I excused myself, went back to the hallway, and sent the video from Denise's phone to my own email. 38 seconds. Clear audio. My mother's voice, my sister's smile, my father's silence, and me, calm, asking a simple question, and my own engagement party. I went back to the table. I asked Denise's husband, who worked in corporate communications and occasionally helped non-profits with media strategy, if he had a moment. He's the kind of person who reads situations quickly. He listened to the audio clip on my phone, and then he looked at me with an expression that was serious and steady. "What do you need?" he said. "I need to know how to handle this in a way that protects me." He thought for a moment. "You don't post it, not tonight, not without advice, but you keep it, and you document everything that's happened tonight in writing. Tonight, while it's fresh. Dates, quotes, the cookout, the seating, the toast." He paused. "And you might want to talk to someone about the relationship stuff, the fiancé situation." I nodded. "You okay?" he asked. "I think so," I said. "I think I'm actually better than I'd been in a long time." I went back to the party for the last hour. I talked to my fiancé's mother about her garden. I ate a piece of the ivory fondant cake with the sugar flowers. It was honestly delicious. I thanked the caterers when they cleared my plate because they were people doing their jobs and they deserved it. When the party ended, I hugged my future mother-in-law for a long time in the parking lot and she whispered, "We're going to take good care of you." And I believed her in the way you believe things that are simply quietly true. My fiancé and I drove home almost without speaking, not the cold kind of quiet, the kind where something has shifted and you both know it and you need the dark and the motion of the car before you can figure out what to say. At a red light, he said, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about June. Were there other times?" He exhaled. "2 other dinners. Your mom called me. She said—" He stopped. "She said you preferred it that way, that you found family events stressful, and you'd rather she connected with me directly." I thought about that for a moment. I thought about my mother on the phone, constructing a version of me that needed to be managed, building a relationship with my fiancé on a foundation of half-truths about who I was. "I need you to understand something," I said. "I don't need to be managed. I don't need people making decisions about my life by going around me. And if someone tells you something about me, especially someone in my family, I need you to ask me first." "I know," he said. "I should have." "Yes," I said. "You should have." That was not the end of us. I want to be clear about that too, because this story is not about a catastrophic betrayal. It's about a slow leak, and the moment you finally decide to fix it. We spent the next 2 months in couples counselling with a therapist named Dr. Okonkwo, who has the calm and specific intelligence of someone who has heard everything and remains unshockable, and it helped. It helped a great deal. What happened with the video was something I thought about for 3 weeks. I talked to Simone, who said, "Your mother called you a burden on recording at your engagement party. That's not nothing." I talked to Denise, who said she would be willing to confirm the context of the recording if anyone ever questioned it. I consulted a family law attorney, a woman I found through my company's employee assistance program, who confirmed that recording a conversation in which you are a participant is legal in my state, that the content of the recording was not defamatory but was factually documented, and that I had no legal liability for making or keeping it. Then I wrote my parents a letter, 4 pages, single-spaced. I described the engagement party. I described the cookout. I described the toast. I described the photo display and the seating chart and 26 years of being the child who got cards when her sister got cars, the one whose college fund disappeared into a market investment that didn't work out, the one who worked 2 jobs in college and graduated with honours, and whom my mother toasted by talking about florists. I described the moment at the photo display. I included a transcript of the 38 seconds of audio. I told them that I was not posting the recording and had no plans to do so. I told them that I was choosing instead to use it as a marker, a clear, documented before and after line. What happened before that night and what would happen after, depending on their choices. I told them I would not be attending family events where my fiancé was invited and I was not. I would not be receiving feedback about my relationship from either of them. I would not be spoken to, publicly or privately, as a burden, a problem, or an afterthought, and I would not be asking for their approval for any of this. I mailed it certified mail, so I'd have confirmation it was received. My mother called me 7 times the week she got it. I let every call go to voicemail. Her messages moved through stages. Confusion, then injured dignity, then a softness I didn't entirely trust, then silence. My father texted once, "This is not who we raised you to be." I read it, set my phone down, and went back to what I was doing. My sister texted, "Mom is really upset. Can you just call her?" I texted back. I said what I needed to say. The letter is the conversation for now. 6 weeks later, my mother called again. I answered this time because I'd decided I would answer once she'd had time to sit with it. And 6 weeks felt like enough sitting. She didn't apologize, not in any real structural way. But she said in a careful voice, "I didn't know you felt so left out." I said, "That's not quite what I described, but it's a start. We have not fixed everything. I don't know if we will. Some fractures go too deep for a single conversation or a single year, and I've made my peace with that being true. What I have now is a clarity I didn't have before. About who I am, about what I will accept, about the difference between a family that supports you and a family that performs support for an audience while quietly relocating you to table 9. We got married the following spring. Small ceremony, 40 people, a vineyard outside of Charlottesville. Denise was there. My future mother-in-law wore a blue dress and cried the good kind of tears when we said our vows. My best friend Simone gave a toast that was funny and honest and specifically about me, my stubbornness, my loyalty, the way I once drove 4 hours at midnight to help her move when her lease fell through. My parents came. My sister came. They sat in the second row and they behaved. My mother did not plan the flowers or the cake or the seating chart. I did. The chairs were in a wide semicircle facing the vineyard rows, and everyone was at the same level, and there was no table 9. At the reception, when it was time to dance, I danced with my husband, and then with Denise's husband, who had been kinder to me at a party than most people manage in years, and then with my fiancé's, my husband's mother, who held both my hands and said, "Simply, you chose well." I thought about that on the drive home. She might have meant him. She might have meant something wider. The life I'd been quietly, steadily building on my own terms. The boundaries I'd finally learned to name out loud. The version of myself I'd been protecting for a long time without anyone asking me to. Either way, I think she was right. I thought a lot about what it actually takes to change the shape of a relationship that has been wrong for a long time. Not end it, change it. Because ending things is, in some ways, the easier move. You walk away and the story closes. What's harder is staying in it with new terms, holding your ground without bitterness, and refusing to pretend that things are fine when they aren't, while also refusing to let the damage define everything going forward. What I did at that party, borrowing Denise's phone, standing at that photo display, asking a calm question out loud, wasn't brave in any dramatic sense. It didn't feel like courage in the moment. It felt like the only thing left that made sense. I had spent years absorbing what my family said about me, letting their version of who I was sit in my chest like ballast. The girl who needed guidance. The burden. The one who was always difficult, always making things harder than they needed to be. And somewhere along the way I had started to believe it. Not completely, not consciously, but in the small daily ways that show up as apologies you didn't need to make, and shrinking in rooms where you had every right to take up space. The thing about being called a burden at your own engagement party is that it clarifies things, not because the word is new. I think part of me had heard it in different forms for years, but because this time it was documented. This time there was no room for the soft rewriting that families do. That's not what I meant. And you're too sensitive that follows whenever you try to name what happened. I had 38 seconds of audio and a very clear memory of exactly where I was standing when she said it. That documentation wasn't about revenge. I want to be honest about that. I didn't play it for anyone. I didn't post it. I used it the way you use a fixed point on a map, to know exactly where you are, so you can figure out where you're going. What I've learned, and what I think is worth saying plainly, the people who treat you as less than you are don't usually do it because you failed. They do it because on some level, your success, your self-sufficiency, your unwillingness to need them the way they need to be needed, unsettles something in them. My mother didn't call me a burden because I had actually burdened her. I had 2 jobs in college. I paid my own loans. I asked for almost nothing. She called me a burden because I was the one she couldn't control, and that word was the only weapon that had ever made me flinch. Understanding that didn't make it hurt less, but it made me stop taking it as information about myself. Simone, who has known me for 12 years and has never once sugarcoated anything, told me something the week after the party that I've kept close ever since. She said, "The fact that you stayed calm in that moment doesn't mean you weren't hurt. It means you finally trusted yourself more than you trusted their version of you." That's the shift. Not toughness, not detachment. Just the quiet decision to stop outsourcing your sense of worth to people who have consistently demonstrated they don't hold it carefully. The wedding was small and honest and mine. And that, I think, is what dignity actually looks like. Not the grand gesture, not the public confrontation, but the room you build for yourself, carefully, on your own terms, where there is no table 9,